Okay, so this is the report, and I just want to tell you this is not just this city here in Alabama, but it says an agency in Alabama city segregated. It's a segregated public housing. And so out of the Associated Press. And so there's a video accompanying with it, but there's a long history of segregated housing that has happened in the U.S. And it explains why some people feel that um, they're being pushed in certain areas. And they notice that certain areas have a higher concentration of black people or residents, and other areas have a higher concentration of maybe white residents or residents that are not of color. So in Decatur, Alabama, a federal review found that a public housing authority in Alabama let white people live in a riverfront towers with a scenic view and other amenities while segregating black people in another apartment development without the frills. A newspaper reported this. So the Housing Urban Development Study determined that 94% of Decatur Housing Authority units in two towers with views of the Tennessee River are occupied by white people, while all the other tenants that are in units in using housing projects are farther from the river are occupied by black residents. And the Decatur Daily reported this. So the developments provide us subsidized housing or homes for low-income elderly people. So minorities on the waiting list to get into these towers were passed over as units there were filled with white people, the report said. So authority workers repeatedly explained the lack of black residents in the waterfront buildings by saying elderly black tenants don't like high-rise buildings and prefer living in garden-style units so they can sit on their porch and come and go as they please, according to the letter from the HUD. So the housing authority settled the claim of discrimination at $200,000, which HUD is distributing to victims of the alleged bias, and a commitment to upgrade black occupied Westgate Gardens at an estimated cost of $1 million. So HUD investigation began with the Justice Department finding patterns of housing discrimination in Alabama and also Mississippi. And I would like to add, housing discrimination is still happening, believe it or not. It might be happening in other areas, but in different ways, but it's still happening. And I still believe that housing discrimination happens with people of color, oftentimes being displaced or pushed into areas where it's only people that are black residents living there because they're priced out of neighborhoods. And a lot of those neighborhoods, if you look at Los Angeles, the way it's made up, you have communities where most of the communities where you see black people, they're living in the low income, unless they're median income earners or high income earners, they're living in like the low income areas where they pay like a high, like maybe 2K, 3K as the lowest in rent, and somewhere along the lines in there. And the living though in the areas is not 2 or 3K or 4K living. So it's more like the rent should be lowered to like maybe 500 or 600 a month. So just to give you an idea, it's high crime. You see a lot of homeless people. On the boulevard, you'll see like a lot of uh, drug paraphernalia and activity in some areas, and then there's some areas that are cleaner that you'll see, and it may have black residents, but you don't see the city really doing a lot to provide assistance. They're slow to do assistance in those areas because of who's living there. And so it's a mixed bag of issues. And then you'll see parks that, it may take weeks before they come out and clean up. And it just, you notice that things haven't really changed. So it says in Decanter Housing Authority, it was the most egregious what was going on. The agency spokesman Joseph Phillips said. So 2 managers who oversee the authority did not return messages. The newspaper reported this. So the chairman of the board that oversees the agency, James Ridgway, said that neither had been disciplined. So we don't have nothing against them. So we have done a good job, Ridgway said. So residents of the 2 multi-story buildings have access to the city park where events are held. They have access to those events where they're held, and there's walking trails, there's the riverfront view, a library, a meeting space, a mobile food pantry is there, a community kitchen, a patio, according to the letter in HUD. Westgate Gardens. Westgate tenant Carrie Garth, 76, said that she welcomes promised improvements but will believe it when she sees it. And so baseboards are coming loose from the floors, and we have a problem with bugs, and the buildings are old and they are not kept up. So this is kind of what I was saying, like some areas that are clean, they still are slow to do any maintenance. And like this lady saying, they have bugs, they have, baseboards that are coming up, they take forever to come out and fix things. So I've been here 9 years, she says, and we don't get a paint job or anything, of course. And that's what happens in a lot of the areas where you see people that are, black residents. They may have lived there for many years, but they don't come out. They don't ask if you need extermination. They don't ask if you need your rug change or flooring change. You need a paint job or anything. Things fixed may take forever for them to come and do. So this is what Garth said. She says that they also have, it says, my cabinet isn't so leveled, so things roll off the cabinet, and I've got a leak under the sink, Garth says. So these are the things that they're faced with on multiple occasions. And so they are not the only ones. So I'm currently going to read a book called So I am currently going to read this book. It's called The Color of Law. And The Color of Law is by Richard Rothenstein. And this book has to do with all of the history of what has happened in terms of housing segregation. So it goes all the way back to when I believe it was the New Deal, a forgotten history of how the government segregated. Yeah, the book's not that costly. It's very inexpensive. So it depends on what version you buy it. And so, yeah, well, this is when you rent it, it's cheaper. I didn't rent the book. I buy my books. But The Color of Law talks about the history of housing segregation. It's by Richard Rothenstein. So just read a little bit. Okay, so it's a forgotten history of how our government segregated America, and it is a powerful and disturbing history of residential segregation in America. While the road forward is far from clear, there is no better history of this troubled journey. So this is a New York Times book review. It's by Richard Rothenstein. And so it's basically gives you a rundown of the whole era, and even up to now, today, on how housing has been, black people have been segregated, and how housing has been affected in our lives, and it's still even going on to this day. And so this is not anything that is uncommon, in other words. So this is something that I feel that is ongoing, and so that video down there is not related to. That's talking about the blast that happened in Baltimore. I heard about that, but yeah. So this right here, agency in Alabama, city segregated. So speaking of that, of housing segregation, recently Ben Carson, he is the HUD secretary, and he is Trump's only black cabinet member. And so Ben Carson, he recently caught some heat because Trump isn't the first president to neglect fair housing. So Ben Carson was a neurosurgeon, or is a neurosurgeon. He's not doing neurosurgeon surgery right now. Right now, what he's doing is he's the secretary of housing. Okay, and so recently, I just wanted you to see. Okay, what he recently done he made a few changes to Dan Rodricks, Ben Carson, Donald Trump, and old dog whistles of housing and race. So Ben Carson, he's a former John Hopkins neurosurgeon who serves as the nation's housing secretary, paid tribute Monday to Representative John Lewis as the Georgia congressman and civil rights leader laid in the state capitol rotunda. We are all called our brother's keeper, Carson wrote in a tweet. And so, Carson might feel the call, but when it comes to racial discrimination in housing, he's not my brother's keeper. He dismisses efforts to address segregation as social engineering, and he just eliminated an ambitious federal rule established in the Obama administration that made local governments demonstrate with data how they actively support the Fair Housing Act 5 decades after its passage. Carson submitted a weaker rule that will allow cities, towns, and counties to self-certify that they're doing the right thing, a setback for efforts to enforce the 52-year-old law. So we are tearing down the Obama administration's affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. So Carson tweeted last week calling it an overreach of unelected Washington bureaucrats and local communities. So in that same tweet, Carson said President at the real Donald Trump, and I agree that the best run committees are the ones run locally. So, an ironic statement given Trump's mobilization and militarized federal police to confront protesters in Portland, Oregon, despite objections from local officials. But Carson's obvious obliviousness to the irony is minor compared to one represented in his praise of John Lewis. So Obama's rule supporting the advancing in fair housing was grounded in civil rights. Congress passed the law in the aftermath of the riots of 1968 following the assassination of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. So in 2015, the Obama administration required municipalities to look at their housing patterns for evidence of discrimination, then come up with plans to address them. So the whole purpose of the rule was to finally provide meaningful guidance for how communities should be advancing fair housing decades after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, says Sarah Brundage, Senior Director of Public Policy at Columbia-based Enterprise Community Partners, We are frankly still trying to make up for lost times in addressing segregation, and this new rule is a big step backward for the federal government committed towards progress. So, new rule is really a return to the status quo, as Robin Dorsey, Fair Housing Director and Fair Housing Action Center of Maryland. So, the new housing development in Maryland will remain unchanged, so we will continue to glut a glut of investment financing loans in white communities while black neighborhoods struggle for an infusion of capital. The housing affordability crisis will continue unabated, and families will still be forced to choose between housing that they can afford and homes near good schools and jobs. So in 2015, Supreme Court found that in Texas case that both overtly discrimination practices and practices shown to result in a disparate impact not based on race but disproportionately affecting minorities that could violate the Fair Housing Act. So it's not enough to say, hey, we're all well-meaning people who don't discriminate. If affordable housing never gets built outside the low-income or the blighted areas, that's a pattern and uncorrected, not one that deserves support with federal dollars. So federal oversight in housing practices is that what Carson calls overreach. Correcting discrimination practices is what he calls social engineering. Okay, so that's where the problems lie with Ben Carson. He's not obviously oblivious to what is going on. And so it goes on to say the tired phrases from a retired doctor who once called Obamacare the worst thing that has happened in this nation since slavery. Trump, meanwhile, is stuck in the past, warning whites about non-existent onslaught of poor people in affluent suburbs. And so, with fewer than 100 days to go to November election, he's hitting notes like those heard decades ago from bigots when fair housing laws went on the books. And so your home is the castle, protected. And later, when poor black families receive rent vouchers that follow them to move out of public housing to better neighborhoods, citing Obama rule, Trump claims that the Democrats want to abolish the beautiful and successful suburbs, bringing who knows and who knows who into your suburbs so your communities will be unsafe and your housing values will go down. Haven't we heard that? And that's the reason why they had white flight. And that's what I'm about. I already kind of know about what's going on, but I'm reading it from this perspective, which is similar to what I already know. So Trump's announcement that that's not a dog whistle, that's a fearmonger air horn. So Trump's announcement eliminating the Obama era rule is a thinly coded racial scarce tactic, playing only to his base, says attorneys Barbara Samuels, who has long toiled in fair housing fields in the American Civil Liberties Union of Maryland. So the duty of affirmatively furthering fair housing is not a creation of President Obama that Trump can undo. It's been a law since 1968, despite the Trump administration's attempt to undermine civil rights. Many cities and suburbs are continuing to follow the approach of Obama administration regulations. So indeed, there is a new and growing awareness that segregation has been the root of many failings. So studies have long demonstrated the racial integration and at the neighborhood level is critical to reducing social inequality and improving the health, education, future, and life chances of children, says Michael Leash. And so, emeritus professor at University of Maryland School of Social Work and Intervention, the federal government is necessary to achieve these goals. Two recent long-term studies show Baltimore to be one of the hardest places in the nation for kids to escape poverty, and that has only started to change in recent years and only because of the remedy worked out in federal court. So we are still a nation of laws and not of petty men. But that doesn't stop Trump, and we've seen this in act this act before a candidate for president stoking fears of an urban menace, though you have to go back 3 decades to find the last blatant example. So a strategy says reached to peel off a small but critical slice of the electorate, white suburbanites, particularly women, essential to this his re-election. So whether the American people will fall for the ploy will be a test of the nation's collective gillibility and Trump's ability to snake as a snake oil salesman, of course, selling these stoked fears of this urban menace coming to suburban neighborhoods and what have you. And so a lot of people are priced out of neighborhoods, and so now we're on to the pandemic. And so, yeah, if you want to on your own, this is how much it is to rent the book. But the book, actually, to buy the book is gonna be this price. Or somewhere in the neck of the woods of that, but it's worth a read anyway. I'm promoting the book, but the reason why I'm reading, I just read 2 books recently. And I'm about to read this one, and then I'm gonna read another one. But one I'm waiting for it to come. I was looking for it. It was one. It was I think it was on Oprah's list. But yeah, so we're really not changed. We really haven't changed, guys. And like, even in 2020, things seem to be operating in the same way. It's just different people doing it. And so I would say to you to pay close attention to these things, because this is also going to play out in how they deal with this eviction situation as well. And so I was looking at something. I believe it was I was recently looking at something. It was like a map that they had. And I don't know if this is it. This might have been it right here. And so I think all of this connects. And so 43 million Americans are at risk for eviction as relief programs and moratorium expire. So it's a nightmare. And so who are the hardest hit? Usually the low income, the poor, and the people who are African American or in the Latino community. And so it had a map. I was looking at it and I was like, wow, some places have already started lifting. It was a good example, or a good indicator rather, as to how they're doing this. And so the map pretty much shows it. It's just like, you could see it. It's like the domino effect. I don't know if it'll come up again, but it was a colorful map. And it was basically showing you how these are just different people talking about it. But it was basically showing you eviction-free New York City. But it was basically showing you a colorful map of some of the places that have moratoriums that are still in effect, those that have just expired, and those that don't have any state protections. And so it basically looked, the way it was set up, it looked just like how I was saying, like the domino effect. And so I feel like all of this, these, when we're looking at the TV, or we're looking at movies, or we're talking about our friends and all this, and we're talking about the pandemic and stuff, they're distractions from some of these imminent threats that are happening. Like Ben Carson, he tried to change this thing overnight. It feels as though, what he was doing. He's trying to, and then you heard, it was really brief, but Donald Trump, he made the claim that, I just saved suburbanites from their home values going down and from their neighborhoods being destroyed by, urban, people coming over and depreciating their, I'm paraphrasing, depreciating the neighborhood or the communities. And so these sound like some of the things that I've seen or heard, like in the book that we read, from other presidents in the past who were extremely racist. And so, having said that, I'm going to let this video go. I know I'm long-winded, but these are things that I don't think people even have paid close attention to, being it shows that this moratorium eviction, this eviction thing is going to be taking place really soon. It's already started in some states, and so even in the housing for older people, all of the black residents, they move them further over. Do you see how that works? It never ends. And all of the white elderly residents, they put them by the water. It's like they, segregate people even though you don't want the segregation. You're not asking for it. They just automatically segregate you. So anyway, I'm going to let this video go. But what do you think about that? It's really sad. It's like it just never really has left. And this has been a problem for many decades. Many decades. This is nothing new. Having said that, I'm going to let this video go. Maybe we should really be paying attention to where are all these people going to go? That's my question. After these moratoriums are lifted, where are all these people going to go? What are they going to do? What about the children? What about the families that they're going to displace? What are they going to do with all these people? Thanks for listening.